we've got this construct that the state is less trusted, right? That's obvious everywhere. It's polarizing society because people don't know where the answer lies.
But people don't want to partially
technology
trust.
is enabling that polarization.
Well, that's the thing. People don't want to partially trust. They want to just either trust or not trust. And
yeah, exactly.
That's what happens.
How does your nation state play into this, and how's it defined?
Why crypto? Constants were turned into variables. You know, the banks after the financial crisis, the dollar is now the dollar and Bitcoin. There's a choice, just like meetings, or is it in person or digital? B, harmonization is one of the most important problems to solve, maybe the most important problem to solve. And the way to get out of harmonization is not to edit laws on the margins, but to figure out how to get to an entirely new zone where everything starts at zero. And all new laws, just like a new code base, you're starting at zero. A new company, you're starting at zero. A new piece of land, you're starting at zero. Being able to start from scratch is like insanely important. And that's what crypto gave us. It's like a new piece of land, but in digital space, just like a new domain. And then finally, like the concept of globally unbanning transactions, which is related to number 2, right? Basically, willing buyer, willing seller, right? You start from there. You start from the concept that all is permissible and that you need to actually add every ban back. Do you see what I'm saying? It's like, the sunset laws, right? Where like an old bad law gets sunset the whole thing. And in this new zone where only those people who care to enter it first do, because most people don't have to, right? Like nobody has to. They can just go and live their life in non-crypto world. Just like most people did not have to immigrate to America. If they wanted to go to the Wild West, they could, but most people chose not to do that. You can go to the wild, cloud of crypto, but most people do not have to do that. But those people who do that, they take the risk, they reap the reward. The earlier the adopter, the higher the risk, the higher the reward. And people learn from their examples. Also within the community, they learn from each other's examples.
I've even, interesting enough, I've even talked about cryptos and Web3, this whole the whole space as the discovery of the Americans. It is, I think it's new GDP as well. It's not recycling of GDP, it's entirely new GDP. For example, world GDP changed significantly as America became part of the globe.
That's right. And actually, so now that gets to the second thing, which is, I think we can actually make that analogy even more than an analogy, like a mathematical analogy, okay? And let me, I'll just throw some stuff. So you talked about the internet, right? One thing I talk about in the book, and I'm going to actually significantly expand this chapter with some visuals and code and what have you. 1890, the American frontier closed. 1991, it reopened because the NSF Foundation, National Science Foundation rather, repealed the so-called acceptable use policy. Do you know what that was? So that actually banned commercial traffic on the internet. Why? You're like, that seems weird. I mean, like we think of the internet as synonymous with .com, right? What the heck, right? So what the AUP was something, because the internet started as like a military and academic and government network, right? And it was originally set up to like have communication systems that would survive a nuclear attack. That's foreshadowing. That's Chekhov's gun. Let's come back to that in a later question, okay? So the internet was set up to survive a nuclear attack, okay? So it was this military academic thing, and they didn't want commercial traffic because they said, look, that's going to get us spam, and it's going to get us porn and malware and all this like stuff. And you know what? They were completely right. All that stuff did happen, okay? But we got enough benefit to offset that cost and more than that. I think that's fair to say, right? That's like literally all the economic growth of the last, 20 years is thanks to the internet. So that's like the reopening of the frontier, because you could register a domain name. That's really what it boiled down to. You could register, the free land existed. You could build from scratch. And think about how ridiculously important this is.
So it wasn't a government controlled land, it became a publicly available land.
I mean, exactly, because the thing is that on a piece of land, I mean, you can build $1 billion business online, but you need 1 billion permits to build a shed in San Francisco. Okay, that's the difference. Is it's literally easier to build, and I've like done this myself. It is literally about as much effort to like get a company to like a $50 million valuation as it is to like get like a duplex built in San Francisco. Okay, it's like the same amount of just energy that you have to spend. So that's just deadweight loss, obviously, right? And so what happens is, and this is a problem with the, one of the things that's happened over the last 20-something years, the entire US government was set up under the premise that the best and the brightest would go in. I know that's like a Halberstam thing, but let's take it actually seriously, that the most talented would go into the US government. And that was something that was true from roughly FDR's brain trust to, let's say, Apollo, right? There was a golden age of the US government, which, by the way, was atypical. Most of the time, you didn't have this massive centralized government in this way. If you go backwards and forwards in time, it was more decentralized. There were great areas of America that did, right? Okay. What's my point? Point is, once you had this Leviathan that was set up, assuming a lot of talented people, and then you had this door to the frontier that opened, right, of the internet, a lot of talented people just started going there instead. First, a trickle, and then a flood, right? And now what's happened is anybody who has any quantitative skill, okay, any technical skill, who's capable of doing basic arithmetic and math and logic and is positive sum, a very large proportion of those people have not chosen to go into the civil service. Why? Because they'd spend, again, 10 years, 20 years of their life editing subpart F or whatever, right? And that's just a waste of their life, literally a waste of their life. Instead, they could go and, be like, just have total control over a piece of land to call their own. How could you be against that, right? That's creative freedom. The same thing is happening to Hollywood. Same thing is, with people going and becoming influencers rather than like Hollywood stars and, trying to get extorted by studios. Same thing is happening to media. People are doing Substacks instead, right? So the old world is just, same thing is happening, by the way, in academia. Professors going and starting companies as opposed to, being a professor. So the old world of academia and media and Hollywood and government, it's just losing all of these brains. Problem is, this is not a comparative advantage scenario because those who remain in the government have power over those outside.
Write the rules.
Yeah, exactly. It's not like, okay, I decide to go make oranges and this guy's making apples and we trade. I'm making oranges and this guy is collecting guns to point at me to take the oranges. Okay, so something that was an individually rational thing to do. And by the way, you could also imagine just a thought experiment. If you had like the 1,000 top tech CEOs, all part of the federal government, it would work way better. Why? Because A could put it, if there's some stupid regulation or whatever, he could put in a call to B and it'd be like the 1950s where it's like, oh yeah, that's a stupid law, forget about it, just go and do this. They just executive order it or they just work around it. They have some interagency agreement. That's how like the government used to work, where there were these guys who were just practical enough to know that this was what was written and this is what the thing actually was. It was in the startup phase of the US government in a sense, right? The whole thing that FDR set up, it had to be nimble enough to win these wars and fight the, Soviets and what have you, right? Then it became ossified and all the best left. And now it's just like this machine that was built for another age, yeah? So there is this thing where I don't fault any of the folks who left. It's kind of a funhouse mirror way, by the way, of thinking of like folks saying, oh my God, these guys are selfish. It's not selfish. It's basically something where you're asking someone to like literally sacrifice their one life, on pushing around paper in a way where there's actually like the curve is against it, right? Because the government isn't getting any better. But the net consequence of this is that you have something where all this energy has now gone to the frontier. And this is now happening not just in the US, it's happening obviously in all these other places around the world. Now India's got like 1 billion people online. You have folks in Nigeria, folks in South America, folks in the Middle East, folks in Europe, and so on. All of them are connecting to this skyhook and getting pulled up by the internet into this new cloud continent that has descended, right? It's literally like, Atlantis, right? Except in the cloud. And a lot of people are essentially telecommuting from their spots on Earth to the cloud. Just to make this a little bit more than just a picturesque metaphor, okay? Here's a question for you and also for your audience, okay? Just think for a second. What percentage of your waking hours do you spend looking at a screen?
Of my waking hours, probably 70%.
There you go. So most of your life and most of the rest of your life is being spent in the matrix, is in the cloud.
Yeah.
There's enormous consequences to all of that, right? First, what that means is, of course, physics and math is very important. That describes a physical world. In the digital world, it's computer science and statistics because it's algorithms and it's databases. It's a constructed environment, right? So that's different than, if you're just sitting at like a desk and typing things, or even you've got a VR headset, the laws of digital worlds are what the programmers have made them, right? And so you can have very interesting, constructed, interesting to human environments in there that just have whiz-bang physics as opposed to the offline world. Right? So first of all, our intuitions of the physics literally change, okay? Number two is the geography of physical space and digital space are fundamentally different. And this is actually like, I could literally write a whole book on just this, because actually you take a simple concept, you can take it very far, okay? For example, in physical space, the most important metric is a great circle distance, like the distance between 2 points on the surface of the globe. And you can modify this and you could say, okay, it's not just 2 points on the surface of the globe, it's like the actual travel time from one to the next. For example, between South Africa and Argentina, it's actually not that long a flight, but for humans to make that migration, would have been like this insane overland journey, all the way up through Anchorage, all the way down. Like humans did make that journey, but that's like maybe the longest journey on Earth by foot. Okay. So you basically, that the point is a physical distance, so even if it's constrained in some way by like actual capability of traveling, is very important, okay, in the physical world. In the digital world, the most important distance is the distance between 2 points in a network, right? The 6 degrees of separation type distance, okay? And moreover, you can like teleport around in the digital world. You can break ties here and then like reform them there, okay? Just as an example, Ethereum is, let's say it's 100 million people or something like, let's say it's 50 million people. There's about 300 million global crypto users. Okay, let's say it's 50 million. I don't know the exact number, okay? It's just kind of sitting over here. And then one day Solana rises up out of the ocean and it's next door to Ethereum, and the Sol ETH trade begins, and Sol ETH rises, and it's taking nodes away from this cloud continent of Ethereum or what have you, right? This is completely different to how our intuitions work in the offline world.
Hey visionaries, thank you for tuning in. For more free crypto content like this, head over to realvision.com/crypto. You'll get early access to the most brilliant minds in the space to cut through the noise, get in-depth analysis, and get you ahead of the curve with unbiased insights.